My guest today is Gill Mann. She is a psychotherapist and author. She started working life as a lawyer, but finally found the courage to follow her heart and retrain as a therapist and has never regretted it for a moment. She has worked within the NHS, a university counselling service, and in private practice. Longer term work with its potential for changing lives is her passion. Writing has always been Gill's other passion, but in 2014 it became a lifeline. She learned that her son, Sam, had died while travelling overseas. For 2 years, she kept a journal, writing about him and her grieving. She found herself addressing Sam too. There was still so much still to say. Another bereaved mother read her journal and urged her to publish it, saying it had made her feel much less alone. Gill's memoir, A Song Ensigned, was published by Retreat West Books in July 2020. So welcome to the show, Gill. Lovely to have you here. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Madeleine. It's lovely to be here. Yeah, I'm well, thank you.
So my show is called Unbroken, and I always start with the very first question is, what does that word unbroken mean to you?
Yes. I've thought about this quite a lot actually, because I think it can have different meanings to different people. And I think for me, I mean, it clearly brings up something about trauma, about loss, about some sort of difficult experience. But for me, really, I think Unbroken is about survival. It's about surviving. And I suppose when I was thinking about what unbroken meant to me, I also thought about the things it doesn't mean to me. And I think in some ways those are as important as the things it does mean to me. Because I think what it doesn't mean is not your whatever the loss or trauma was that you experienced, it doesn't mean that has not had an impact on you. We didn't know what was happening with Sam. We just knew that he wasn't well and that something wasn't right, but we didn't really know what it was. And it was very hard because
But this watchful waiting to me as a mum of three kids, that was just so painful to read about. How can you just wait till, what, they harm themselves? Something goes terribly wrong? What do you watch and wait for?
well, that is it. And it was absolutely agonizing. I mean, I do understand they can't section someone, because ultimately that's what happened with Sam. They did a mental health act assessment and they decided that he was really unwell, and he was taken into hospital against his will. And that was again a terribly difficult thing, because he did not accept, he never accepted that he had been that there was anything wrong with him, because actually the way that Sam's psychosis tended to manifest itself, as well as this this sort of detachment from reality, was also that he was in this incredibly elevated mood. So he wasn't sort of tormented by voices inside his head that were telling him to do terrible things. He was seeing wonderful colours, and the world had never been a more beautiful place. And for Sam, of course, there were no benefits, because it wasn't that it was sort of stilling these really horrible sort of attacking voices in his head, because he never had that. What it did was it took away the sort of state of bliss and euphoria. So it felt like a loss to him.
Yeah, it kind of dulled him really, didn't it? Took away
It did.
all
It
of that.
did. And yet he was still there. And actually, for about 2 years after he came out of hospital, and life sort of did get back to normal. I mean, it wasn't as long as 2 years actually. But it I began to see a life that Sam could have, and that it might be quite an okay life. Sam's lack of insight into the fact that he was ill was regarded as a real issue. And I could see that. They couldn't, he might have become a very disruptive
Yeah, because I
member.
guess if you don't have insight, then you would think, well, why do I need to take this medication? And the medication actually helped his mind, even though it dulled him. So, oh, it's just like push and pull the whole time, really, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was never straightforward. It really wasn't.
So you were really writing your thoughts down and your letters to him as a journal, but somebody read your book and who had also been a grieved mother and said it was actually very helpful, and she encouraged you to publish. What did it feel like to have your story out there for other people to read?
Yeah, it felt really strange. And I have to say, I waited a long time. I waited 6 years before I looked for a publisher. That's not a long time in the context of your
Yes.
experience. But I felt I needed to be certain that I was sort of happy to put it out into the world. But I am glad I did. I've not. I think it's been hard for my family. I think it has been hard for the family because, of course, I was putting my version of Sam, my experience of him, my version of our family out into the world. And of course, everyone has their own version within a family,
Yes,
their
from
own
where
experience.
they perceive it from.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, I was sort of, my version was, of course, becoming the sort of perceived wisdom on it. And it is a very, it is, I don't hold back really in the memoir. I do talk about really quite personal things. So yeah, it was hard, but I am pleased I did, because I think, what I said at the time was, if it helps one other person,
Oh,
it will have
absolutely.
been
I've
worth it.
thankfully I've never lost a child, but I've lost my dad, and some of the things that you wrote about the hate list of of who comes around when you need them and who doesn't, and like I never heard from them, and mentally I must have done that as well because I didn't realise I was holding on to that as well. So yeah, no, I think you just hear your struggle in it, and then eventually you hear your peace at the end. So it is a hopeful book, even though it is a painful book, because yeah, it's just, I always write some quotes when I'm listening to a book or reading a book, and some of them, he is everywhere in the room, and yet he is nowhere. That just really jumped out at me. And you got over his death, but you might never get over his life,
Yeah.
which was profoundly sad. And um, you lost Sam twice, in both his illness and in his death.
Yes.
What would you like to tell people about schizophrenia? Because it is a word that people, I think, get a bit frightened of, don't they, when they hear the word
I think they
schizophrenia?
do. I think they do. And I think I'd like to say, don't be frightened
Yeah.
of it, because actually, so many people live really successful lives
Yeah.
with schizophrenia. And I think it's such a shame that the way we tend to hear about it is in the media when there is some awful thing that's happened,
Yeah.
which is, a sort of, the chances of that happening are so minuscule, and yet that's what people take away.
Yes.
And actually, so many people with schizophrenia, they're incredibly brave. They're living with a really tough illness. Um, and and they are making the best of the life that they've been given, and they actually need support and acceptance and kindness. And it's not, and more than anything, I hate actually talking or hearing people talk about schizophrenics, because to me, that is putting people into some strange sort of
Well, it sounds
kind
like
of
that's all
label.
you are, doesn't it?
And
That you're a
that's,
schizophrenic person, but you're a person with
you are a
schizophrenia.
person first. So it's still not really known. And I think it's a shame that there is not more investment in research into schizophrenia, because it's not an uncommon illness. It affects 1 in 100 young men and women the whole world over. So it's not just in certain sort of developed or less developed nations. It is that those are the statistics everywhere.